Awesome. Now I want to invite Greg Schleusner, our next guest from Building Smart International and HOK. Greg's one of the experts leading the new version of the IFC schema, IFC 5. He also flew from New York, especially for this conference, and we thank him for doing this. Greg, you can speak directly in the microphone. Or
this way? Thank you all for having me. I appreciate the time. Dan, you're impossible to follow, so I apologize how boring this might be. But yeah, please, very much, the conference has been wonderful. Really appreciate the invite. Thank you for having me. Shall we get started? Okay, so it says it a little bit later in the slides, but I'm one of the 2 volunteer co-leaders of the technical domain in Building Smart. So I work for HOK, I'm not a Building Smart employee. I guess they pay me nominally to go to conferences, but there's 2 of us that are volunteer leads, and then there is such a thing as the technical coordinator, which is Leon Barlow, who's the sort of person that actually works for Building Smart. So if you don't like what you see, remember I'm a volunteer. Does this one work? Oh, there you go. Okay, about me, just because I'm from the US, I live in New York, but this is where I grew up, so I'm not a New Yorker by, what do you call this, by birth. So United States is big. I say where I'm from all the time. I don't think everybody knows, but that's where I was born, that's where I live, and this is what I do for a day job. So architect by training, switched to doing this, what I do today after 5 years. I basically run our innovation programs internally at HOK, but I also get myself involved with a lot of big projects, and this is how I started down the path of looking at what the future of IFC 5 would look like. At the time, it wasn't really a path, it was just sort of a problem. So this is the UK Parliament building. We were asked 2014 to do a review of how you renovate this building. It's still no work has ever started on this. I don't think it ever will start. But at the end of the day, we came up with a bunch of schemes, and we ran into these interesting issues that look like this. So this is not a regular building. There's all kinds of stuff in it, like this picture of Queen Mary. It doesn't look like a traditional asset. It doesn't look like, BIM. It's got all this other stuff, and oh yeah, maybe it has some geometry. And if you look at something more boring, like a radiator or something like that, you get the same general idea. So, while that was supposed to happen, we actually started renovating this building, which is the center block building in Canada, which, when you actually start to look at this, you have point clouds, photogrammetry, solids, stuff like that. And we made this little diagram because this came with like the world's best BIM requirement, LOD 400, everything in Revit, and oh, by the way, you can't do most of the stuff you're asking for in Revit. So we put this little chart together that said something to the effect that, oh, well, there's a whole host of different kind of models. Some of them are 3D, some of them are point clouds, some of them are photographs, some of them are CAD files. And so the idea here was, how do you make this into a coherent whole? And the data structures we have wouldn't really support that, and we don't have anything in the IFC today to do this, so what does that look like? Just to give you a chance of what this building actually looks like in section, this is the actual post-renovation that's going to move forward. This building is going to be being worked on for a long time. This is the big hole in front of it right now. But as we went through this project, we started to look at, like, I'm not one to be dogmatic about things, so I started rethinking LOD in this project, which I can't stand at this point. But what I was getting to is we actually arrived at something like this, and I think the text is a little squished there. Oh, well, the actual way you start to do this is to use IFC as the sort of linchpin. So, like previous demonstrations, we end up using Unreal to put all this together. But what we actually do is we use an IFC bounding box to hold the location that all this other data is tied to. Again, I'm getting to the IFC 5 story, but here's our Unreal model too. So, move this forward, we get this representation that's the sort of much better looking version of this. And it started to develop a pattern which, we have different representations, we have different authors, we have different pieces of data that need to come together. how does that actually sort of set the stage for what a future IFC looks like? Clearly, this is a super bespoke project. You don't want to do that. So how do you drive the future of IFC using this information? So I'm going to back up a little bit. Understand the current foundations of IFC to help you understand why it needs to be changed. So first off, this is what IFC looks like. If you've not actually looked at it, it's a intentionally unordered list, which is problematic if you think about, if I want to see the same data twice, well, it's intentionally not supposed to be the same way. The standard is a standard such that this long list has these little references and it can be out of order. It's based on Express, which this is the most recent book you can find to learn the Express modeling language. It's a very powerful language. It's, if you're a web developer, like JSON schema or something like this, but it was fashionable, but certainly went out of fashion. It's what the STEP community uses. So you get this sort of relationship between product structure, and keep going. So every once in a while you'll hear these terms, so I just want to point them out. So STEP, Express, STEP is the stuff that's the representation, Express is the modeling language. The point is, it's old, it's really hard to break into pieces, very few people know it, and this is a very complex modeling language. And then the way we actually used it was very, I will probably say, disk space, what's the best way to say this? We tried to save enough disk space while managing this because it started in the 90s, and so we have this prototype inheritance structure, which means anything at the bottom, so that blue box in the lower left, has everything above it as a precedent. So it's super inherited, super nested, super gross and graphy, and all these things make this really challenging for people to learn because it's not a simple flat data structure. And this is the Bible, if you will, for this, but again, the geometry is one of the harder things for people to understand. So we went through a bunch of processes to validate what a new IFC needs to need, or IFC needs to support, not needs to need. Emma used this term golden thread, the previous term, oh shoot, I hate when my little hand-drawn animations go like that. There's a little thread, there we go. Golden thread is the term that the UK is using. The term that came before it from the digital twin world was digital thread. But basically it's this idea that you need to connect all these sets of data together, and once you're operating a building, you need to be able to stitch it back. So something like this, excuse my little hand-drawn things, but basically this idea that design to construction is never clean. So the possibility that you could answer a question based on stitching the information together, know the ramifications of those changes, something that's impossible today. I started this with a simple little thing. We write these very complex specifications in the US. Anytime a contractor asks us to change something, we have to check like 50 different places and meeting notes and all these things that people hate. So generally, this is the basis of like the key ideas that we need to look at, but then you start to get a little bit more detail. Almost there. And then we have this problem where our data is quite monolithic. So right now you export IFC today, Speckle and these sort of tools can break this data down, but we have this general problem where data sort of goes in and out of tools, and you've done a lot of work to get the data out, but you sort of keep dumping it back in. My little hand-drawn animations again. And so you get the point that this is a very inefficient process because what we're actually doing is having to combine the data in tools versus being able to combine it externally. So luckily, there was a model out there, if I keep playing this forward, called USD, that had actually solved this for a different industry. So in the VFX world, Pixar made this standard called USD. We'll talk about USD a little bit later, how it fits into the IFC5 story. But functionally, it changed the relationship with software in this market by saying, no, the full representation, the complete representation should be outside any one of these tools. So keep moving this forward. I don't even know why I'm pointing, but. And so you end up with this generic idea that, well, okay, if you have small data sets that are atomic, let's call them, and you can get them out of the application simpler, so it's not a batch operation. Today, IFC is on big projects, it's hit a button and wait, depending on which tool you're talking about, then you can much more easily achieve that goal. So we also then validated by going around to different groups and different parts of our meetings that we have so many different owners of information. This light bulb is the dumbest, simplest example, but the idea that, you know, you could be renovating a building, an architect might own the location, a lighting designer or engineer might own the performance of that light, electrical engineer might own the systems associated with it, you know, contractor might be trying to bulk procure things if they're trying to renovate a building or something like that, or use attic stock from other, you know, that the client already has. But the general idea that this needs to be able to happen simultaneously, and because the way IFC today works is very serial. And then when you start to look more broadly, you have situations where even this simple door, if it's electrified, has a different context, different pieces of information than for the electrical engineer than it would for the architect. And so people need to be able to assemble their own representations in the way they think about the data, even spaces. And then on top of this, you insert the infrastructure world where there's now thousands of different ways to look at different pieces of data, and you can't have this single monolith. Whoa. So we'll see if my little trick here works, because I can't click on these things. We went through this validation process. A lot of my work has been non-technical. It's actually going through and talking to rooms like these and validating these things. Because I'm a practitioner, I sort of see all the things, so I can at least start the conversation. So if I go forward and go back, no, it does not work. I hid these slides, but basically this is an exercise we went through in Rome. We did a similar one in Norway a couple months back. But there's a lot of things there, like small bits of data. Security is becoming an issue. People want to talk about prototyping, out of order. Contractor knows something about something we're going to design as a design team before we've released it. There's a whole host of things that look like that. So the general idea that we've come up with as a methodology is to componentize data. So it's very simple. If I can get that to go. So traditionally, we have a very object-oriented view of the world, like in IFC, you'll talk about the wall or something like this. Well, in general, that's true, but to have these small bits of data, multiple owners, you have to do something more like this. You have to be able to break it down and describe the whole. Now, you need software and other things to like manage all these pieces. But generally, this is a way that other industries have decided to solve this particular problem. So you break the whole object into these pieces in this very dark text that says entity in it that you could barely read. Basically is the generic concept that used to be represented by the whole object. So I have a very silly workflow, but I hope it starts to illustrate how this works. I think I need to look at this way. So imagine you have the most simple furniture planning app that somebody can make, version 1, and all it does is place furniture and maybe a style. So there we go, we've laid out the furniture. And I'll play this ahead. So today, the second you move from tool A to tool B, you basically have a choice. So either you can stop using the first one, because when you move the data to the second one, you've invalidated the use of the first one, or you do what I think most people do, is just have 2 copies of the data, which is a problem, you can imagine. So the alternative is to say, well, actually, that application, it makes the entity, which is just sort of this generic concept of that chair, and those 3 pieces of information. Not everything, just those. And if you keep playing this forward, sorry, I keep turning around, and I think I should be pointing this way. So if I play this forward, and you move to the next tool, I can import that data as a reference. So don't think of it as an import, think about it as referencing the data that was produced. Now I can make new information, and when we play this back, let's step out a little bit. Sorry, my clicks are slowly dying. Okay, we got it. Maybe? There we go. Now I can take the new information that came from the second app and do something like this. This is sort of dying. There we go. I can just say next if that works better. So what you see here is you actually have potentially some duplicate information because these tools do author this thing. But if you click the next slide, what you should be able to see is you can then say, well, actually, this is the information I need to describe this chair. This is what, if you will, wins. And if you keep clicking, you can now start to think about a distributed ownership model. So let's say I share small bits of data, location, property, and geometry with a contractor. Let's say it's design, I'm not done, but I know these 3 things about these chairs. Again, it's a silly example. If you click next, like maybe the contractor works with a procurement team that can add some data, click next. And they keep clicking, you can just go ahead. Can add their own data that describes this thing independent of the design team. This could even be algorithmically done. The point about machine-to-machine stuff is important here you made yesterday. Like, this is the kind of way you structure data to make that work. If you click keep going, then we can sort of, we've already done this distributed assembly. If you click back, or sorry, click forward, sorry. You can just click through. So I'm going to make a modification. You can keep going. Just keep clicking. There's like 8 slides that I'll build to this story. So maybe you make a small modification and keep going. And you re-export just the locations, and you can keep clicking through. You update, update, update. And what you're actually able to do is distribute this information to the contractor. None of the data they have added to this is invalidated, which is often the case today. Like, people don't want to do this stuff out of order because information is invalidated. You can go to the next one. And at the same time, at some point in the project, when you do field verification or survey or something like that, one more, you can take over and ownership can be transferred between these pieces of information. That is the big story. So we can pause here for a sec. Now, I mentioned USD coming from the film industry. Because we're at a place where we haven't really codified any of the technical standards, USD is becoming quite popular. Again, this is a format that comes from Pixar, but it's starting to show up. NVIDIA is doing a lot of work with a product called Omniverse. So we're looking at it as what we'll call it a friend right now. We don't exactly know what's going to look like. But it was mentioned yesterday that we've just signed an MOU with, you can go to the next slide, the organization that they've spun up to make this a better, more standard format. And at this point, like I said, we're looking at the model of the work we need to do and taking advantage of the fact this is gaining traction in the industry and seeing where we need to be close enough to take advantage of it, but also solve our own problems. I think I only have one more slide left. We do have some examples out there that you can take a peek at. They're on the Building Smart GitHub site. They're very early stage development, but that's the direction we're going. Thank you.
Perfect. Please have a seat. Yeah, that's I don't know where to start. so first of all, great presentation. Sorry for the clicker. I really appreciate the idea of changing small bits of stuff in a bigger model and not exchanging that model every time there's a small change to that object. And I think this could be a very valuable for the industry. I went to Hong Kong early in this year, and there was a very, very big Chinese project, and the guys were exchanging something like 400 IFC files per week. And the amount of data was so big that they needed to contract AWS, so they needed some really big servers just to make sure they can do the transfer. So I imagine out of all that data exchange, there could have been a lot less big reduction. So I think that's a very efficient way to see it. And I understand USD does this. It has this ability, right? Or it's just an idea at this point.
There's certainly a way to use USD. USD is sort of generic in this concept, but like the example you're talking about, depending on the applications that author IFC, if you study change early on, and especially on the design side where I live, stuff does change a lot. But by early or late stage in a project, there's very little actually changing. But to work with a contractor and communicate, we're exporting loads of this data, and so probably halves of percentages is actually changing. But we're spending hours of computational time to export it, and then you can imagine it's hard if you have 400 files to find those changes that nobody does it, or it becomes very expensive. So there's all kinds of opening up new kinds of workflows that we think comes from this. And then on top of that, being able to interact with different data points is going to become much simpler.
Does that mean IFC, or the vision that you have is for IFC to become let's say, more easily to work with by different, let's say, new open source software that natively modify it or create it or...
Yeah, so I don't get to own the vision of what IFC does, but certainly this model would lend itself to smaller tools making smaller edits because they can control small bits of information. So I don't know if Building Smart has it as a stated goal to do this, but it's certainly a ramification.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's amazing. I don't know. Let's take some questions from the audience. Well, I already have one.
Sorry. My question is, if we are looking at the digital twin of a city, but instead of using traditional ways of using volumes and objects, we are translating everything in voxels. Then we could use USD as a tool for taking registration or all the changes that happen at the level of voxel.
Well, so I need to be crystal clear here. We're certainly going down the path of making sure IFC5 is, I use the word friends because I don't have a better word for it, okay, as in probably very compatible with USD, but probably will not be USD. So what your voxel question is a perfect one, because IFC 4.4, one of the stated goals is to get voxelization for underground tunnels and these sort of things. Well, there's other formats that do this better. If we use something that's adjacent and works really well with other native things that you can make connections, then the reality is IFC can fit into a workflow, but it doesn't have to be one format to rule them all. You can stitch it together in other ways. So that's the general idea. So we don't have to have an opinion as Building Smart, okay, about whether you can have voxels, because we sit next to this data format that can do a whole host of other things.
Okay, thank you.